Alright, I'm going to show you two different ways that you could solve the rotate by n example. To remind you what the problem was, you write a method which takes an int array as input, and also a number which represents how many elements the array value should be rotated by. But I told you in the description of the problem that we're going to be rotating to the left. So if I have this array and I'm rotating it by 1, all the elements shift to their left, and the element that was on the very left-hand side wraps all the way around and gets assigned to the right. So this is the kind of transformation we're going to apply. Alright, so let's just start writing it. I'm going to do one that's conceptually simple first, but is less efficient, and then we'll think about making a more efficient one. So here I've set up my example. I have a test case. This is the array that I'm going to rotate. I've written my method, RotateByN. So I think a very conceptually simple approach here is, I know I want to rotate this many times, n times. So what if I had a helper method that was called RotateByOne? And what it does is it rotates my entire array just by one element. In that case, I could write a loop that loops n times, and I'm just going to rotate by 1 exactly n times, and that would solve my problem. The advantage to doing that is it's made a problem that feels more complicated into a problem that's a little bit simpler, because now I only have to think of code that would rotate by 1. Alright, so let's think about that. I told you that this problem was similar to some of the things that I had outlined in the notes. So if you go and look in the notes, I have an example of deleting an element from an array and copying everything else to the left by 1 to have them sort of slide down. This is almost exactly the same thing. If I imagine that I have a bunch of numbers here, what I could do is I could loop from left to right, and I would take each number and I would copy it 1 to its left. So if I copied 7 into the 5 location, and then 2 into the 7 location, and then 3 into the 2 location, that's going to work. That's going to shift everything down. The only problem is, by the time I get to the end of the array, 18, that's where my original number 5 should go to. But the problem is, if I started out by overwriting my initial value with the one next to it, I've obliterated it, and now I have no idea what number I'm supposed to put over here. So a good first step is create a temporary variable where you can save your 0th element, then start looping here and copy every one down by 1, and then as the last step, you can take that one that you saved and assign it to the last element. So let's execute that strategy. So I said I'm going to create a temporary variable that will hold test element 0. Now I'm going to loop, and I'm going to loop starting not at the 0th element, but I'm going to loop starting at the first element, so that way it will be safe for me to copy one element to the left. I'm going to go until I get to the end. And I'm going to take test element, well, let's write this and then we'll think about what the indices should be. So let's see, if I am at test element I, and I want to copy that value 1 to the left, the index 1 to the left would be I minus 1. And I know this is safe because I started at index 1. If I had started at index 0, then I would be copying the thing at index 0 into the index -1, which doesn't exist, and you would get an array index out of bounds exception. So you see if I run it, it gives me an array index out of bounds exception, -1, because I'm trying to store something into index -1. Alright, so this is safe. The very last thing we needed to do after we've copied everything down is to store that temporary variable at the end. So we'll say test.length -1 equals temp. And we're done. So now if we run it, I am rotating my test array by 1, and it looks like the 1 has rotated. I can rotate it by 2, and that looks like it's worked. I rotate it by 3, also worked. I rotate it by 4, and now 1 has gone all the way back around to where it started. Okay, so that looks like it's a working solution, although I'm not handling edge cases. So for example, I didn't say in my preconditions for the method that n had to be positive. If I type -2, and we see what it does, It just doesn't do anything. It doesn't rotate it. But it would be nice if a negative number here made it rotate in the other direction. So you can think about how you would modify this approach to handle that kind of thing.